This story is a bit of a long one, and it does require some background information. I currently am a 21-year-old male. At the time, I was a freshman in high school. I am a pretty big guy and always have been. I'm currently 6'4" and was 6'3" in freshman year. I am not muscular but have a muscular build and broad shoulders. I've always had some weird connections with the paranormal, and I live in a very religious family. For example, when I was 4, my mom remembers putting me down for a nap, only to find out that I did not sleep at all. But she said I told her I spent that nap meeting my guardian angel and playing with him. I even told her his name, Michael. Many people in my family report seeing angels and beings throughout our lives. As a freshman in high school, I spent a lot of time hanging out with my very religious friend Nate. I personally was not very faithful in the Christian belief of God at the time. This was a time in my life when I was very confused with how the world worked and did not believe faith was necessary, and I still don't. This is mildly important as it relates. The first night was an absolutely normal night, as I was at my best friend Nate's house. We decided to invite some girls over to hang out, but as teens living in a small town in Wisconsin, we really didn't like to go out unless the adventure had already been pre-planned. So, that night, we decided to sit on Nate's computer and go through our MySpaces and browse YouTube. The girls seemed a little off, like something was bothering them. While browsing YouTube, I noticed a cool-looking UFO sighting. Mind you, I was obsessed with aliens. I clicked on it. And when I did, the two girls freaked out. They then went on to explain that 2 nights prior to this, they were hanging out with another girl who had told them that she had been abducted. She even had strange markings to prove it. The girls said that after hearing this and seeing this, they were mildly on edge, but later that night, they both fell asleep. They said that when they woke up, they had random scars in their chest and back. And they said they felt ridiculously tired as they woke, like they hadn't slept all night. They were simply freaked out and spouted to me these events after clicking the video and begged me to turn it off. We continued our night without any crazy stuff happening. I did joke around with them, telling them that Nate and I were next. Nate, being religious, was calling BS on the story the whole time and trying to rationalize it into religion, and that pretty much drove them home, which I was okay with because it was getting pretty late. The next day I went home to shower and change, and then headed right back to Nathan's house. We hung out pretty much every day. Nothing crazy happened that day save for some goofy shenanigans and video games. Later that night though, Nate was on MySpace. His computer is set in the dining room in the corner furthest from the living room. The living room was separated by a wall with a double-door hallway, without the door but with the curtain separating them. The living room is set up with both couches against both walls and the TV opposite those couches in another corner. From the living room you could see the stairs going up to the second story. I sat on the small couch with full visibility of the stairs, but no visibility of Nate due to the curtain that was drawn. I knew he was on MySpace because I could hear the constant chatter of keyboard keys and quiet music. He had it turned down because his family was sleeping. He was listening to Monster by Skillet. I was on the couch watching Adult Swim on Cartoon Network, and it was about 10:10 p.m. At the time, Robot Chicken was my favorite show, and I was enjoying it, when out of nowhere I noticed a light shine through the window at the top of the stairs, shining down the stairs as if someone flipped on the lights. In my mind, I thought it was his mom or dad, so I switched the channel so I wouldn't get in trouble for watching Adult Swim. Again, they're very Christian. Then I noticed the light continuing to shine down the stairs, also began to shine through the front door and the bay window, looking into the 3-season room. The light was enveloping the whole of the outside of the house. This all happened in a matter of a few seconds. The next thing I knew, the light had shined through all those windows and then from the window behind me. I began to panic. In my head, either a nuke had gone off, or there were cars surrounding the whole of the house. This light then made a pulsing vibration, like a plane flying but closer to your ears and more calming like a heartbeat. As the light grew in vibrancy and blocked out all the other visual things, I could no longer see anything except white. In this moment, I turned my head towards where Nate was, and regardless of the wall dividing us, I somehow saw him, and he saw me. He was floating, as if he was sitting in an invisible chair. It was as if the walls had been removed, and he was looking at me in a state of panic. All I could say was, "What the hell?" It came out in a quiet voice as if I was whispering, but inside my head I was screaming. As soon as my sentence was finished, the whiteness blinked away, and I was still sitting on the couch watching the same TV, and Nate was still at the computer. Almost immediately, Nate and I both jumped up from our seats and started to freak out about what just happened. Nathan said he heard me say what the hell and saw me floating as well, but he said my mouth didn't move when we talked. He sweared up and down that it had something to do with God, but I resorted to aliens after hearing about those girls' story. While freaking out, we woke up his dad by accident. Eventually, he went back to sleep after hearing our ridiculous testimony. Then the two of us sat in the living room in silence. It took a moment for us to realize that we were watching an infomercial on Cartoon Network. It was now 3:30 in the morning. I jumped up and screamed at Nate. We had been gone for 5 hours. In those 10 seconds, we were away from reality for 5 hours. I've told many people of this story, and I'll be telling it for the rest of my life. Whether it was a glitch, abduction, or some sort of religious experience, I don't know. It was amazing, terrifying, and profound. I will never forget the vibration inside of this light. Unlike the girls, though, I did not get any particular markings on my body. Today, I am agnostic. I've tried smoking marijuana to try to feel that glitch feeling again, which I've had at work before, but I've only seen that bright light one other time since then. But that time I got to see the source of it, and it was not earthly. Mind you, being a freshman in high school, I didn't do drugs or have any mental issues. Long story short, I'm still very close with Nate, and we tell everyone close to us these stories separately to try to prove that our experience really happened. But to us, we never really figured out what happened to us that night.
My name is Nick. I live in a nice apartment in the middle of town, in the Midwestern region of the United States. I love the paranormal, the sky, and as I type this, I listen to the most chill music ever with my Shetland sheepdog. I am a 16-year-old male. It was around 2 or 3 a.m. on a Sunday morning, but I had been staying up all night playing video games, trying to enjoy a Saturday that's already left. Ellie began to whine, and I realized that, being the horrible pet owner that I am, I really needed to take her out so she could potty. She was watching me as I fumbled around for a sweater and the dog leash. I swear she's like a human, but a whiny little perfect child kind of human. It's cute when it's on a dog that should be a model dog that you would see in those movies or on commercials. I hooked her onto a leash and walked out into the brisk air of the night. Honestly, I've always felt safe walking around at night, because both the police and fire stations are in view of my apartment. I walked Ellie for a little while and eventually got to the dog lot, where pet owners let their dogs go to the bathroom. It was nice and quiet, and I listened in one earbud to Fleetwood Mac singing the song Dreams. Yes, I remember the song. It comes back to me whenever I even leave my apartment. I started to scan the sky. I loved looking at the stars at night. I also get excited when I could spot satellites. I can usually tell they are satellites instead of planes, because it's a moving solid dot that is crossing the sky in such a fluent motion. I closed the gate to the small dog lot and let Ellie off of her leash. Then I looked back up to the sky, and I was delighted to find a satellite in view. I watched it for about 5 solid seconds until I had realized that there was a second dot moving in the sky. It was even moving in the same direction and speed. Something was wrong, but I hadn't realized it yet. Fleetwood Mac had stopped singing at the wrong time, yet the background music was still playing, only it had started to slow down. All of a sudden I had started crying and I sat down. I was not sad at the time, I was just confused why this emotion had come over me. I kept watching those satellites until they disappeared, but not over the horizon. They faded right into the middle of the sky, and as soon as they did disappear, I doubled onto my knees and I threw up, barely missing my legs. Ellie was completely unaffected. She was still pooping or something. I stared upwards and looked for the satellites. As soon as I did, I could no longer see, and I have no idea why. I'd got nothing in my eyes. I put my hands up to each eye and they felt normal. I was panicking and I started to call out for my dog. She obediently came over and started to lick the tears off of my face. My earbuds started emitting strange noises like beeping and white noise and non-human swishing sounds, and I was becoming truly terrified. These swishing sounds sounded like the excess air you hear coming out of someone's mouth as they whisper loudly, and I was sure as hell it wasn't on my Spotify playlist. Hearing that noise while seeing that blackness freaked me out. I felt around for my iPhone 6 and I turned the flashlight on successfully. and I shined it close to my face. As I blinked, the light began to come back. I stood up and looked around, but my eyes were trying to adjust back to the darkness from the flashlight. I was relieved to finally see, but I was still insanely scared about those satellites I had seen in the sky. Maybe they were government secrets or phenomenon from space yet to be explained. I knew, though, that it couldn't be the third option, because I knew I was being watched. I know you guys know about that feeling of being watched. Everyone does. But do you generally know what direction you're being watched from? I'm not sure if it's normal, but I always know from where I'm being watched. At school, whenever someone's looking at me, I turn around and stare right back into them. Well, I couldn't look into anyone's eyes here. I could only look up. You can say I'm being too much of a believer, that it was more than just a phenomenon, but this felt like an episode from the X-Files. Even as I'm typing this out, I wonder if it was just a time loss. I think that alien abductees always report time being lost and malfunctioning technology, but they also report strange animal behavior. Ellie was being more normal at that point than I was. It's confusing. And sure, there's some light pollution out there, but not enough to affect whatever those dots were. There were also no clouds that night in the sky, and there was no one I could see to bear witness to what had happened to me to prove it. I also haven't told my mother or sister about it, because they really truly would think I'm a liar. But what if what's up there is actually real like I think it is? What if those were government aircraft? Why would they do that to me? And what if they were aliens? What am I supposed to do? I don't honestly know. But when it comes to being afraid, I don't worry about the things that are down here with us. I'm mostly concerned, or afraid, about what may be up there, and what might happen if I look up again. My story begins just 2 years ago when I was 16 and getting into airsoft. My friend, who we'll call Jay, introduced me to the sport and even bought me my first gun. It was a pretty fun time. I met Jay when I was in high school until he moved to Green Bay, Wisconsin. Luckily for me, he's only a few hours drive, so it's not that much of a pain. To give you an idea of how we played airsoft, we used to play in the woods 10 minutes away from my home. We'd go deep into the woods, and once we found an area we liked, we'd go at it. On this particular day, we decided to play at night, to give us this tactical espionage action feel to the game. He's more of a CQB kind of guy, and his loadout was not doing so well out there. We were 30 minutes into the game when Jay and I felt this throbbing in our heads with a weird type of sound. I did my best to call out to Jay, but I get no response. Hoping to make this throbbing stop, I put in my headphones. I was theorizing that it was a sound, and lo and behold, I was half right. The throbbing partially decreased to a bearable state, and I started running towards the direction to where I was. But when I got there, what I witnessed both horrified and awed me. There was a tall being, probably 7 feet tall or so. It was holding Jay with both of her hands. I say her because she was blonde, very pale, and had the curvatures of a female. She was so beautiful, but oddly not human at all. Her eyes were way too narrow, but big. It sounds weird, I just don't know how to describe it. She wore this kind of Vault-Tec suit, but was metallic, like wearable metallic. It's hard to explain, but it was 2 different shades of gray, and it was skin-tight from what it seems. She turned to me and said, "Everything will be all right." I don't know how she said it, because her mouth didn't move. I don't want to say it was telepathy, but I don't know what else it could have been. I was scared out of my mind because this person, this thing, was taking Jay away, and I had to do something. My first instinct was to shoot at her, but I caught myself before I pulled the trigger because pellets wouldn't do a damn thing against this woman. So I yelled out, "Wait!" And she looked at me like the way a mother would when she's curious as to what her little kid just said. I told her with a shakiness in my voice, "Jay needs to stay here. You can't take my friend. He has a family to go home to, a girlfriend who will honestly blame me for his disappearance. All the responsibility will be on me." She smiled warmly and placed Jay back down. She then said to me, "One day, I'll be here for you. Do not worry, as you will come back." Then a blinding light shone behind her, and she stepped into it. The light proceeded to fly up. What I can only assume was a UFO flew up into the sky and vanished. A little while later, Jay wakes up, and tells me he passed out from the throbbing in his head. I was glad to have my friend back, but I was also scared and horrified that I'm the only one who knows what happened that day. I haven't told anyone because this obviously sounds like crazy as all hell made up stuff. I've had a lot of crazy things happen while airsofting, and that's number 2 on the list. I'm sorry if this seems all over the place. The events of that night still haunt me to this day, and I haven't seen the woman since. I'd be lying to say if I said I wasn't scared, because I am. If anyone out there has had an experience like that, please share it with us. I just want to know I'm not going crazy.
I was 17 when this happened. It was in 2012. It was a normal night. I ate my dinner, played some video games, showered, and went to bed. Everything seemed normal. That night, though, I had the most horrific nightmare. I was lying in bed, my room exactly how it was when I went to sleep, when something with long arms pulled me from my bed and through my window. My window was on the 2nd story, so that's pretty much impossible. You'd need a ladder just to get in, and I always kept it locked. Everything went dark. After I was pulled, I woke up cramped inside a medium-sized cage, almost like a dog cage. It was so bright in the room, almost blinding. Still, I was able to make out some shapes and figures. There were about 3 other cages, all like mine, sort of in a circle, around this long shape. I assume it was a table. I heard lots of buzzing sounds and whimpers, but not much else. So I started to scream, "Let me out! What the hell is going on?" I wasn't given an answer. I tried to reach up and shake the cage. That's when I realized my hands were tied together with some sort of weird material. If I had to describe it, it was like heavy air wrapped around my wrists. My eyes started to barely adjust to the brightness, and I saw figures in these other cages. Other people had been taken as well. I could see these tall, slender things standing out there, hovering over us, watching us. I started to scream again. "Let me out," I said. "I'll kill you." But I heard nothing in return. I was trapped, and these long pointy metal rods began jabbing me from all angles. I was bleeding profusely and I screamed. It felt so real and it hurt so badly. I actually felt like my skin was being torn open. I've never had a dream so vivid, and to this day I've never had one like that. Eventually I woke up in my bed, my body sore all over. I remember my horrible nightmare and checked all over my body. The weird part, though, was I went to bed wearing clothes. I always do. But when I woke up, my clothes were in the floor. I tried to ignore it. I figured I took them off in my sleep and I kept checking. There were no marks, no scratches, no blood on my body. I felt reassured. I thought I was just being silly. After all, it was just a dream. I was probably just sore from thrashing in bed during a nightmare. I went about my day and that evening went to a local hangout stop I frequented. I started talking to some friends there, when one of the guys began to tell us about a crazy dream he had that night. And the dream was the exact same one I had. The window, the cages, the figures, the torture. It was all 100% the same. I was feeling a bit freaked out after this. I asked him if we could talk in private. I explained my dream to him, how it was identical, and he looked scared too at the time. After that, we started to research online about similar nightmares. Everything that came up was about alien abduction. I don't know if I got abducted, and I don't know what really happened. But 2 people sharing the exact same dream experience, the figures, the pain. All I do know is I did not sleep well for a long time after that. This is not my story, but my mother's. Growing up, she often spoke of aliens. She was a believer, and I was as well. As I became a teenager, my mom and I were very close, best friends if you will. We told each other everything. We were talking about aliens, and I asked her if she knew anyone who had ever been abducted. She said to me that she had. She said she doesn't really remember it, but she knows it happened when she was 4. She said she remembers just bits and pieces. I freaked out a little, and she ended the conversation because she did not want to scare me. A few years later, my mom became very sick. She began passing out, having tunnel vision, and had lots of head pain. She went to doctor after doctor until finally she discovered she had a disorder called Arnold Chiari malformation. Basically, a piece of her brain had fallen into her neck and was crushing her spinal column. They took an MRI, scheduled her brain surgery, and scheduled another MRI right before her surgery. About a week before her surgery, after she woke up, this particular morning, she found me in the living room. Her eyes were wide and her skin was pale. I wouldn't say she was frightened, but she looked shocked. She told me that aliens came to visit her last night. I was a little freaked out but intrigued, so I asked what happened. She said she woke up in the middle of the night, sat up in bed to see 3 gray aliens at the foot of her bed. She said she was not afraid, but she kept trying to wake my dad up by pinching him, and he wouldn't wake up, like he was in a trance or something. The gray in the middle did all the talking, but their mouths never moved, so they must have been talking through their thoughts. He told her that when she was a little girl, they had implanted a device in her head to monitor her. They were done, so they needed to get it out. She said the one on the right was nice, but didn't say a lot, but the one on the left was very angry. It was as if he did not want to be there, like she was a waste of his time. She asked the one in the middle if it would hurt. He told her no, but she will have a headache when she wakes up. She asked if it was all real, and he told her you can pretend this is a dream and go back to bed. But if you want proof it's real, look out your window and you'll see a blue light in the sky. He then instructed her to lie back. He placed his hand on her forehead. She felt a sudden shooting pain in her head, like a bad headache. She opened her eyes, and they were gone. She got out of bed and was hoping to see a blue dot in the sky. It wasn't just a blue dot. There was a huge blue light hovering over our back pasture for about 10 seconds before it shot off. She took some medicine and went back to bed. Then she woke up shocked and told me this story. I believed my mom's every word. I could see it in her eyes. A few days later, I rode to the city with her for her last MRI. She was blindsided after the MRI when the doctor asked her what had happened. She asked, "What do you mean?" The doctor asked her if she had any trauma to her head. My mom told her no, and then she asked why. She said because there's a hole in your brain. She pointed to the hole in the MRI. Then she shows us the results from the first MRI, and the hole was not there. I looked at my mom and she looked at me. She had a fear I can't explain in her eyes. It freaked her out. She whispered nervously to me, "I told you so." She has her surgery and the surgeon said there was a substance on the hole in her brain that he could not explain. He said he got a sample of it and would let us know. But we never heard back from him. We never heard what it was. When we had asked about it weeks later, all he would say is, "I don't know what you're talking about." But I think he does know, and he doesn't want to say.
This happened to me just a few months ago. Originally, I shared it on Reddit after it happened. At the time, I was living with a good friend of mine who lives in the middle of nowhere out in the woods. Everyone in her family are pretty hardcore skeptics, including me, which is probably why we are such good friends. What I mean by hardcore skeptic is that we are those kinds of people that tend to try hard to poke holes in the stories of everything we hear or read. We tend to rely more on facts than personal testimony, so we don't really believe in ghosts, cryptids, or aliens. Now to get to the story. At the time I was living in this house, my cat would sleep in the room with me and would wake up at around 5 in the morning every night to go use the litter box which we kept downstairs. This particular morning though, my cat woke me up by meowing in my face and jumping all over me. When I looked at the clock, it was only a little after 2 in the morning. I just thought my cat needed to go to use the litter box early, and I needed to pee anyway. So I let my cat out and ran down the hall to the right downstairs, where his box was. Now, the main restroom was straight across from my room, and I went in without turning on any lights because my eyes were already pretty adjusted to the dark. In this bathroom, there is one window you can look out of when you sit down on the toilet, and we always kept it open because the air in the house was broken, and it could get really hot in there. This was about the middle of the summer, so the whole house was pretty warm. My roommate's dogs were barking outside when I sat down, but they bark at squirrels all the time, so there was nothing to be afraid of. I look out the window to the backyard where they were kept and noticed that they were running around the shed where we all play D&D. The main shed door was open, and I thought that was odd, because we always kept it closed so the dogs would not go in and mess anything up, because we left our boards and stuff out when we weren't playing. After peeing, I stood up and I flushed the toilet. But then I looked out into the shed, and I could see a light coming from it. It wasn't a normal light. This was much brighter, and in front of the door, I could see a shadowy figure. It was a typical alien body, I guess. Big head, small body, and really long arms and legs that seemed disproportionate to the body. Suddenly, the light went out, and everything was just super dark. Dark like when you turn off your bedroom light, and your eyes are nowhere near adjusted to the dark. The dogs were also quiet, and I could hear the wind blowing lightly through the leaves of the trees in the backyard. I guess I had a late adrenaline reaction, though, because I ran out of the restroom and down the hallway to get to my friend's husband and tell him something was in the shed. He jumped out of bed and got his gun, and he ran down the hall towards the kitchen to look out into the shed. And in the meantime, I told my friend what had happened, and she seemed really concerned for me and my mental state. Her husband came back after a few minutes and asked me to go out to the shed with him to explain exactly what I saw. We went out to the shed with me telling them both everything. Nothing was out of place, though. Everything was set up exactly like it was from the last time we had been in there. My roommate and her husband both laughed at me and told me that the whole thing must have just been a nightmare, that maybe I had sleptwalked to the toilet or something. So that whole experience must have happened between 5 to 10 minutes tops. I mean, it doesn't even take 5 minutes to go to the bathroom, right? Well, when I went back to my room, 2.5 hours had passed. It was now 4:30. We never talked about it again, and I never saw anything like that again. I still don't know if I believe in aliens or anything like that, but I have no idea what happened that night. I just can't explain what I saw. But I do know for sure it was 2 a.m. when I went to the bathroom, and it was 4:30 when I got back. I cannot explain that much time distortion, and there's nothing I can do to reason that to myself. I am 20 years old today, and this encounter happened 7 years ago. I grew up with a huge family of 7 brothers and 5 sisters. A good chunk of us still lived at home. I lived in Canada, British Columbia, on a reserve that is a piece of land that First Nations live on. My family is very aware of the paranormal and believes in all spirits and creatures that wander the world. It was normal for us to sneak out at night and search for creatures that my dad would tell us. Our favorite pastime when we were younger was looking for aliens and discussing about what if we get abducted one day. It was the summer of 2009. I was 13 years old, and my favorite pastime was staying up late watching TV and drawing. My bedroom's quite small and is on the 2nd floor. I had enough room for a queen-size bed in the middle of the room against the back wall with the closet in front of me, and my TV stand and a window to the right of me. This night was a little different, and around 2:30 or 3 in the morning, most everyone in the house was asleep. I have to say, being a teenager and it being summer, I would stay up super late and sleep until 5 in the afternoon. So I wasn't ready to go to bed at this time. I was watching TV, and from the corner of my eye I see a flashing color of lights. And I didn't think too much of it, because our neighbors are the partying type. Then my TV begins to go to static, cutting out of the TV show I was watching, and eventually it goes out and my room is completely dark. I think nothing more than that being weird, and I assume at most it's one of the spirits bugging me like they usually do. The light of the moon lit up my room still, and I could barely make out 2 purple grayish humanoid figures beside me. They weren't tall, they stood about 5 feet tall and were very skinny. Their hands were weird looking. I stared at them for a while, rubbing my eyes to see if I was imagining things, but I wasn't. Immediately I was scared and I ran under my blankets, but as soon as I did, my whole sight went black. Then a flurry of visions ran through my head. They were flashbacks from the time I was born to the very last minute when I was watching TV. Normally, when I realize I'm having a dream of sorts, I can wake myself up, but I couldn't move, I was stuck. When I woke up, it was morning, and the feeling of waking up felt weird. There was a fuzziness around me, and it seemed like I was walking on air. I was both scared and shocked. I jumped out of my bed and ran to the kitchen to find my sister and brother talking to my mom and dad. They were talking about how they were seeing stuff around my house. Last night, they described seeing 2 beings that were short and skinny with big heads. They said they were too scared to move from their beds when they saw them. I was so shocked, because I wasn't the only one who saw these things last night. I told my parents about my experience, and I was happy that they believed me and that I was not crazy. My brother jokingly said, "I guess you were too weird and useless. They didn't want you, so they sent you back." I laughed nervously and I agreed with him. I find the experience weird and shocking to this day, and I still wonder about it. Why did they abduct me? Occasionally I bring it up to my parents. We still live on the reserve in the same house. I mean, I don't live there anymore. I've moved out. But whenever I go back, my room is still my room, and sometimes I find myself staring out the window at the sky.
I usually would be asleep by 8 p.m. every night. I had to be at work by 5:30 every morning, so I made sure to get my sleep. One night though, I was awoken by a bunch of dogs barking loudly. I was very confused when I woke up, because I was not in my bed. I was actually in the middle of my street, just walking. I found out the dogs were barking at me. At the time I realized that I had no control of myself. All I could move were my eyes. The next thing I remember was I was walking to this wooded bike trail area near my home. As I crossed a little bridge, I knelt down on one knee. With two hands on my bent knee, I peeked through some trees and bushes and saw a craft of some type. It was ball-shaped and had no lights. It landed under these huge power lines. I never saw it fly from the outside. As I looked at the craft, an opening opened up. Then two small beings came out of the craft. The next thing I remember was that I was boarding this craft. As I walked onto it, the two beings followed me into it. The craft was kind of cramped and dark, but there was a neon kind of glow to it. I then bent down and asked the being where we were going. They answered me, and they said that they are taking me behind the moon. I then asked why. They said that they could not be detected by the Earth from there. I said okay, and then we took off. I looked out of some sort of porthole or window type thing and saw us leaving the Earth. We passed the moon, and then we made a U-turn type of turn back. It only took us about 10 seconds to get there. For some reason, the whole time, I was not scared at all. Actually, I felt like I knew them. The next thing I recall was the only time I was really scared. I woke up again, this time naked in a funnel-shaped pool filled with a greenish-black gel-type liquid. The pool had to be about 20 yards wide all around, and it was really deep. The pool was made of some kind of shiny metal. With the gel, it made the surface very slippery, and you would slip under the gel if you tried to get out. I then realized something very odd at the time. I was not alone. There were at least 15 other humans with me, all of them screaming and panicking. This is what scared me. I didn't know what they were screaming about. I thought they knew something that I did not, so I got scared as well. Somewhere under the gel moving around I could see. Most were trying to escape. One man kept climbing halfway out, and the closer he got to the top, he would get hit by some sort of beam, and then he'd slide right back into the pool. I thought this guy was just insane. If he did get out, where would he go? Then I heard a voice telling me not to be scared. They told me I would be fine, and that I could breathe the gel. They said I could eat it and digest it too. I couldn't drown in it, it was impossible. We could live in the gel. It also recycled human waste back into itself. I believed some of those humans were in the pool for years by the way they've been acting. And after a while I myself got used to breathing under the gel, because I did not want to get hit by that beam and slide under. A few moments later, I blacked out. The next things I remember are some pretty vivid memories. But I do need to let you know that I am deathly frightened of frogs. I know it sounds crazy, but it's my one phobia. It's their skin. Now, back to the story. I was rudely awakened by a being that was armpit high, holding my hand, taking me somewhere. I remember that touch of their hands had woken me up from my unconsciousness. I tugged away and started to threaten them. I clenched my fist like I was going to fight. I said, "Get away from me," and if they touched me again, I was going to do something. But he told me if I tried, it would change the world as I knew it. I don't know what he meant, but I did not have a good feeling about hitting this thing. Not to mention I felt like if I hit them, I would get a mess all over myself. They seemed slimy or translucent, if that makes any sense. So I was kind of stuck in defending myself or making a huge nasty mess all over me. That's when I realized that I was communicating with them without using my mouth. I knew what they were thinking, and they knew what I was thinking. It made things difficult for me at first. And that's when the smaller beings brought over this taller one. It was actually taller than me. As the taller being approached me, he told the smaller one that this is a prophet, or the prophet. I looked at his face for maybe half a second. His face grossed me out, so I never looked at him again. If I looked at him again, then he'd know how I felt about his appearance. I didn't really want to offend him, because I liked this one. He made me feel more comfortable. He explained that they wanted to do some medical examinations on me, and if I would cooperate. So I made a deal with him. If they did not hurt me or scare me anymore, then I would do it. He promised, and then he allowed them to do what they wanted. He also said that he would answer all my questions that I had. He walked me around as we talked. I looked at the ground the whole time so not to look at him. The next thing I remember was the medical examination. I remember coming out of another blackness. I was not scared whatsoever though. I trusted them now. And by being able to read their minds, I knew that they weren't lying to me. As I remember, they took some skin from my right arm. It was like the thinnest layer possible. Unviable to my eyes, but all they needed. They then took a semen sample. I didn't understand this. Again, I won't go into too many details about this, because by then the story would be about 900 pages long. Later on, I asked about this procedure. The last thing they did to me was the strangest of all. It took my right eye out of my head. I could actually see with my other eye, the back of my eyeball had a cord or veins connected to it. And I instantly asked about this. Then they put something metal in my eye socket. It was about the size of a broken piece of rice. I asked, What's that for? They said they would use it to monitor me from space. I thought it was so they could see everything that I could see, like a video camera or something. They then put my eye back, and that was that. Everything went black again, and I woke up. My next memories were of the taller being and I talking. This was the best part, because he answered my questions and showed me things in my head. I don't recall the exact order of my questions, but I asked away. I must say that they communicated to me like an adult would talk to a 5-year-old child, with simple words, stuff like that. I thought it was funny. Anyway, the first question was about my semen. Why did they need that? He literally told me they would be making baby humans in space, and I simply replied, "Oh." As I asked more questions, he put visions in my head. In an instant, he showed me how they do it. As we were walking and talking about the humans in space, he walked into this doorway that you can't see until you're touching it. Just as we were talking about humans in space, these two kids about 13 and 15 years old, one male and one female, turned to look at us. Both were human. They looked like full-blooded, perfect human beings. They were both sitting down facing away from us. They then turned around and looked into my eyes, and then the tall one introduced us. They turned around and continued to do what they were doing. Believe it or not, they were either controlling, driving, or operating the craft or building we were in. They were in control of operating something. This really freaked me out, because they knew what they were doing, and they were just little kids. The aliens trusted these kids. It was crazy. And being that you can read minds in this place, I knew the kids weren't scared or uncomfortable. They were programmed to master their job. There's much more on this scenario, and I've only scratched the surface. As we left, I noticed he was taking me somewhere else. This was kind of confusing to me also. This time it's like the room just appeared around us. We were just instantly inside of it. I think it's their doorways, they're unexplainable. Next thing I see is a dead cow hanging up above us. It was hanging head up and rear down. Nothing to my eyes was holding it up though, so it seemed to be floating. I was baffled. I know cows can weigh hundreds upon hundreds of pounds, but it was just effortlessly hanging there. Next thing they did was lower it or dip it into some kind of gel in a box-shaped pool, just big enough for the cow to fit in. Strangely enough, the gel did not overflow, as they heaped the giant animal inside. The pool was filled up. Next they lifted the cow and it was cut, dead, and I was starting to get scared. I thought I was next. But then he showed me why they do this. It all related to the humans that they had in space. He said, "What do humans eat as a child or infant?" And I said, "Milk." And he said, "Exactly. What do adult humans eat?" And I thought, "Hamburgers and steaks and food like that." And again he said, "Exactly." Then he put a vision again in my head and explained it all. They can't just take Earth cows into space. They do just like they told me. He said that they make their own cows up here. Germ-free, no fleas, no illnesses, pure cows. They were pure, just like the space humans. They were perfect specimens of their species. Like I said, I have much more information on this topic. I then recalled the thing they had put in my eye, and I decided to ask about that. They told me that humans do it all the time as well. He explained it like this. How does a tiger explain to itself when it hears a helicopter coming out of the skies in the jungle? It's a big, metal, scary object. They all of a sudden feel a pain in their hip. They then lose all control of everything except their eyes. Then these creatures emerge from the object and start to do things to the tiger, like tagging its ear, like even taking teeth, like taking semen to preserve their species from extinction sometimes. Basically scaring the crap out of the tiger for its own good in a way.